have Dr. Daniel Salter as our presenter today, and I'm Lisa Cook, Senior Director of Career Services, and I will be serving as your moderator. We also have with us Nicole Skalski, Career Services Advisor, who will be running our webinar and also providing you with resources from the Career Services Center that can support you in your job search towards the end of the broadcast. Okay, so with that, I want to first introduce our Career Services Center in terms of our mission and our team. For those of you who are not familiar with our team, our mission is based on preparing our learners to navigate career transition through educating, coaching, and advising. So our Career Services team, from left to right, Dina Berggren, Nicole Skalski, who's running our webinar today, Denise Pranke, and Andrea Obricki. Before we introduce our presenter and get started with our topic, we would like to get your feedback. So Nicole is going to run a quick poll to ask you some questions. So oh, sorry, go ahead. What is your top reason for wanting a teaching position in higher education? I want to continue my doctoral research. I enjoy teaching and want to shape the next generation. I want to supplement my current non-teaching position. I want a more flexible, less stressful work arrangement. So pick your top reason.
Okay, so far it looks like I enjoy teaching and want to shape the next generation is the top one. What we'll give, looks like about 73% voted, so we'll give everyone a few more seconds. And again, we're so glad to have such a great turnout and get your feedback here. Okay, so let's close the poll and share the results with you all. So it looks like 58% say they enjoy teaching. That's really great to know and want to shape the future generations. And then that's followed up pretty much evenly with more flexible, less stressful work and supplementing my current teaching position. So that's really great to know, and we welcome you, and hopefully you'll gain a lot of insight on how to move forward with that.
Terrific.
Okay.
Thanks for doing the poll, Nicole. And so now we're going to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Daniel Salter, who is working in strategic research initiatives for the Center for Research Quality. He's also a faculty member in the PhD in Education program for the Richard Riley College of Education and Leadership. Daniel, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to pass the ball to you.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. I hope wherever you are, you're staying warm. It's cold pretty much throughout the country here. I have a lot to get through. I just will, as a brief little introduction, say that I applied for my first college teaching job 22 years ago. I've been on both sides of the table for faculty searches, both applying for jobs and getting hired into jobs. So what I want to try to do today is kind of give us some general tips and there are very few best practices, but some general tips on how to negotiate this very complicated, sometimes contentious environment. So let's go. All right, so some of my objectives for the session here. I certainly want to give you a sense of what the challenge is here. It's a pretty complicated environment right now coming off of the recent recession. Universities are changing staffing patterns and stuff, so it's a little complicated, a little contentious at the moment, so I want to try to give you a little bit of insight there. Certainly, one of the things I find that I think is kind of funny is that many students who are interested in becoming a college professor don't really have a good understanding of what college professors do all day. So I want to provide a little insight there because I think it'll help shape how you apply for these jobs and write your cover letters. I want to examine a little bit of the differences. Whoop, you're getting ahead of me. There we go. Examine the differences between full-time and contingency teaching. A lot of acrimony there right now, so I want to kind of unpack some of that. And finally, identify some strategies for success. There really aren't many best practices. I just want to point out, though, just to keep it all real here, that roughly 1% of the population have a doctoral degree, and in some disciplines, 1% of that group have faculty positions. So it's a pretty competitive environment. So I want to talk about some things to kind of position yourself well to get these kind of jobs. Okay, Nicole? Thanks. In higher education, there's two basic kinds of category of teaching positions that we talk about: non-tenured and tenured positions. Tenure is a commitment on the part of the institution to have you around for the rest of your career and kind of protects you in the kinds of work that you do. Many teaching positions these days are not tenure earning. They are just straight up jobs like you would have down at the Taco Bell. So in the non-tenured type of positions you might see out there, certainly adjunct and contingency faculty, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Instructor positions, often entry level. Some institutions, depending on the type of institution it is, may often you're required to have a doctorate. But in some smaller schools, community colleges, you may be able to teach at the undergraduate level with a master's degree. That's something that if you're currently a student, you might even start looking at the moment. There's also, and I wouldn't rule them out because this is kind of my pedigree here, is student services positions. Often there's an opportunity for you to teach as an advisor, as a first-year counselor. Many of those jobs have teaching aspects to them, so I wouldn't rule them out. In the world of professors, there's kind of three pecking orders here for us: assistant professors, associate professors, and full professors. The big distinguishing thing is being pre-tenured, entry-level. Assistant professors is what most people go into. Associate professors and full professors have been assistant professors and they've been promoted up. They've earned tenure. Something to keep in mind, just so you know, that each of these steps along the ladder often take as many as 6 years, sometimes more. Some associate professors retire as associate professors and never go up for full professor. The last group of jobs out there are not entry-level. Department heads and chairs, deans, provosts, normally filled by full professors, but something that might be down the line for one of you. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do professors do all day? We don't sit around and eat bonbons and watch TV. We work like everybody else. Most faculty positions are, full-time faculty positions are some sort of mixture of the big three here in professor world: teaching, research, and service. Excuse me. Teaching, direct classroom instruction, and sometimes advising of students falls into the teaching realm. Believe it or not, in faculty jobs, it can range from everything from 0% of your load to 100% of your load. 100% load, you know, some teaching positions are just about the teaching. There's nothing else you do but teach. Some college professors actually have no teaching, or maybe have one course that they teach all year long. And that's because they've been able to buy themselves out of their teaching responsibilities with grants, which is kind of in the next thing. So quite a range there. Research, some institutions, especially research institutions, expect you to do research, continue what you've been doing as your doctoral research, only much more involved. One thing that becomes critically important at this point in your career is grant funding, and to be able to find the money you need to do your research. Again, like teaching, research in a faculty load can be 0%. You might have nothing to do, or 100%, that you've bought yourself out and all you're doing all day is research. At a research institution, I was at Penn State for a while. At a place like that, the research you do is roughly 60% of your load is what they expect you to do. You know, and in some institutions, if you're at a teaching school, a smaller school, you know, what you do as research might actually be considered in this third category as service, which is kind of a catch-all for community work, program administrations, other duties as assigned. It just varies so much, it's hard to say what it's about. But those are the big three. And the reason I want to point them out is that, you know, as you write your cover letters, as you write your applications, and we're going to talk about your CV in a minute, this is how you need to start organizing your world. Excuse me. So Nicole, next slide, please. Let me tell you some hard truths out there about teaching. A thing that sometimes we miss, the fact that a good student does not necessarily become a good teacher. And I was glad to see the poll at the beginning, because I think good teachers recognize they're good teachers and are motivated to be good teachers. And that's great. In some institutions where research is valued, there's this weird irony that being a good researcher actually enhances your teaching, but if you're a good teacher, you're somehow giving up on your research there. Excuse me, apparently not true always, but just something to keep in mind. Another huge misperception: online instruction is actually not easier than face-to-face, and many of my colleagues who work face-to-face are learning that lesson the hard way. Tenure, not about you as a teacher perhaps, but more about your potential as a scholar, the full package. And finally, something to know, just keep in mind in the years ahead here is that higher education as an institution has changed a lot lately. How faculty do their thing and what they're about, they've not changed as quickly. So there's some disconnect there. And you got to excuse me to take a sip of my tea. All right, Nicole, next slide, please.
I just want to thank Daniel. I just want to say a special note of thanks today because he's been under the weather quite a bit, and so we just really appreciate his participation today. So you take your time and take all the tea you need, Daniel, but thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. I'm getting tons of good questions, too.
Good. Well, we're going to take a break. We're going to take a break in a minute and answer some of them. And thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I picked up a bug at graduation, so I'm on the backside of it, and I appreciate your patience with my occasional coughing. Easier than rescheduling.
Thank you.
Nicole, if we could go to the next slide.
Sure.
Okay, contingent faculty. Quite an issue these days in higher education, and for a lot of different reasons. Just know that they are called a lot of different things. I think the important part is that we are talking now about part-time teaching positions. So maybe adjunct professor. At Walden, we call you a contributing faculty member. The bigger category, I think, is contingent faculty. The issue that gets raised here is that, for institutions is, can I hire 4 adjuncts to teach, or do I hire 1 professor? So why would anybody want to go this route? And a lot of people do. You want to teach, but not full-time. It is, you may like the job you have now, and you just want to be doing something a little bit more. To supplement your income. A lot of people find it is an easy way to kind of get a little bit of money on the side. I would recommend that not be your only motivation. One thing that we have seen happening, though, is that this notion of professional adjuncts, that there are a growing number of people who piece together a full-time job by 2 or 3 part-time teaching jobs. That's a lot of work. I'm not sure I could do it. Many people want the flexibility. My wife actually teaches for us part-time and off and on. And when my daughter was getting married last year, she took some time off from her teaching to focus on those sorts of issues, and now she's planning to come back. And finally, you want to avoid all the non-teaching stuff. There are some politics, believe it or not, in being a professor. And if you don't want to get into all of that, for a while I taught community college part-time. It was come in, teach my classes, say hi to all the folks, and go home. I didn't have to get into department meetings and all that other kind of stuff. A couple of the recognized challenges, and and to be fair, I got to put this out here. There are few protections for you as contingent faculty. You don't get all the perks, you don't get all the benefits, and you may not be part of the collective bargaining unit at an institution. It's just kind of what a lot of contingents feel is kind of a second-class citizen status in higher ed. So got to know that going in. There's also an issue of consistency of employment. These are often positions that are filled based on need. So if enrollments go down, the number of sections of a course go down. Next slide, please. Okay, and I know I'm going through this pretty quickly, but I want to save a lot of time at the end for questions here. So where do you find these jobs? Well, there's a lot of different places, and you got to really do your research and bring those good doctoral skills that you're learning to be a researcher to the process here. I've highlighted a couple of important ones here. One of them is the Chronicle of Higher Education, which has recently kind of redone their whole approach to jobs, and they now call it the Vita approach here. They're probably the first go-to place for faculty positions. Another place is higheredjobs.com. They have a section just for faculty. A lot of times they're the same job. Sometimes they're not. That's in the Chronicle. Another thing I would strongly recommend that you do is also keep an eye on local listings. I originally, one of the first jobs I had teaching part-time was at Columbus State in Columbus, Ohio. And I found that job not in the Chronicle, but in the Columbus Dispatch, where it was listed. So some smaller schools, they don't have the budget to advertise, and they don't have the need to advertise in the Chronicle. They will just advertise locally. Another smart thing you need to do, and I had, one of my recent graduates from Walden figured this out pretty quickly and was kind of the way she was able to find the job that she found, was you need to bookmark the HR departments of institutions, especially smaller ones, especially online institutions, because often the contingency work that they have, if that's what you're looking for, is only listed on their HR site. So, for example, if you wanted to work at, let's pick one of our peer competitors like Capella, you would dig through, find the Capella website, the HR department there, and bookmark that and keep watching it. Another place to find jobs are professional groups. I'm a member of a couple of higher ed professional groups, and they have a listserv that I get every once in a while that if there's a job opening in my area, it's posted to the listserv. And oddly enough, that's usually the first place you see these kinds of jobs is within the group. And we'll say a little bit more about this when we get to some tips. Social media. Like I said, faculty are dinosaurs, and they don't typically embrace new things very quickly. So have a LinkedIn profile. Set up your Chronicle Higher Ed profile. I don't know how much being in these environments really advantages you in a faculty search process, but eventually we'll get there. So it's probably worth doing that, just so you have another place where people can find you. Next slide, please, Nicole. Okay, one more thing, and then we'll take a few questions, if that's okay, Lisa, and then we'll plow on into the last part of it here. The academic curriculum Vita. If you've not heard about your CV, you got to get familiar with that term. That's the way we talk about your resume in higher education here. The difference between a CV and a resume basically is detail. Your resume is usually pretty short, to the point, tells the highlights. Your curriculum Vita, on the other hand, as a faculty person, has everything you've ever done. So when I was at Penn State, one of our most senior colleagues, every time he went to print his CV, it would choke the printer because he'd done so much. They are typically organized in a different kind of way than maybe what you organize your resume. And this can be a whole topic in and of itself, but I just want to highlight kind of the high points in the CV that if I was on a search committee I'd be looking for. Certainly, first and foremost, your academic credentials. That opens the door for you. You need to have a degree in what you're trying to teach. Any academic positions you've held. You may want to blend that into a discussion of your teaching. You may want to have that as a second session. If you've done teaching, many search committees now ask you to provide your teaching evaluation, so you need to be hanging on to those in all the kinds of environments that you're in. You should have a section for your research, big or small, papers and presentations that you've done, all of those things, all formatted in APA format, any grants you've gotten or worked on, all that sort of stuff in a section, and then all the service stuff, all the committees you've served on, any kinds of special things that you've done for university, and then all the other stuff. For example, your volunteer work, those sorts of things. Always a good idea to put references on requests for academic positions. Believe it or not, you don't think it is, but it's still a good old person's network a little bit, and people know one another, and you can actually be a little strategic in who you send as your references there, especially if you have a lot of people. For example, if you were applying to a job in my area at Penn State, you might want to have me on your, because I know the people at Penn State, so that's a good thing. But there are places that I might not be a good fit. So the curriculum Vita gives you an opportunity to kind of rethink, rework. I think everybody who's put one together has found it to be almost a strange kind of psychological process to kind of sort out what's important for you, what's the message you want to say. And the Chronicle, the new Vita process that the Chronicle has developed here, and I mean literally within the last 6 months, if that, organizes a lot of your information in the same sort of way. So that's a place where you might want to go just to start and start plunking some of your stuff in. So next slide, Lisa. Sounds like we have some questions. Can you flag a few for us?
Yes. Daniel, several students have asked about how do they gain teaching experience if they don't have prior teaching experience. For example, Carlette says, can I start by volunteering as an assistant for a professor?
And that's a really good question. And I think that in the online environment, it challenges you a little bit more to be creative in how you solve this problem. Certainly, as you were saying, volunteer work. The other thing to know is that even though you may, and this was the path I took, even though you may have designs on being a college professor to research one, I went and I did some of the grunt work. I taught at a community college for a while. It was a challenging situation, but I'll tell you, it taught me all the good classroom chops that I needed to move into the other environment. My Penn State students used to say, "Oh, you're so funny, you got such good jokes." I said, "I've been road testing these bad boys for 12 years. I know what works." So, get out there, even teaching teaching a class in as smarmy as it may sound, at, maybe Sunday school or something in your community at the, short-term teaching things, presentations, doing presentations at a professional conference. I'm going to say that again here. But I think an easy solution for a lot of folks to get some teaching experience is their local junior college or community college. These places have a mission of staffing their faculty with local people, and often with many part-timers. So that's just a perfect environment for that. So that would be probably an easy way. Again, volunteering, those sorts of things. At Walden, we don't do the teaching assistant sort of like some schools do, but there are little spots of that here and there. I think for most of the students at Walden, something local, like a community college is the way to go.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Another question from Alice. She asks, how important is one's specialization in applying for teaching positions?
Well, that's another good question, and it depends a lot on the type of job. When I applied to work at Penn State, they had a very particular type of person that they were looking for and type of stuff to teach. At the community college, I actually, even though my degree is in education, I actually taught in the psychology department because I had quite a lot of coursework behind me in those kinds of areas. So I think as you move into very focused college things, your specialization will be relevant. As you take on teaching jobs that are more general, you need to be a journalist. I would just say, though, that many full-time teaching jobs, even at the Research One kind of institutions, you still got to be a little bit multidisciplinary, because you often are teaching the core classes, maybe the undergrad classes, the basic classes. So I think in some way, and I know it's hard, but you got to kind of position yourself both as a generalist in your area, but also be prepared to show that you're a technician. And the place where you show your technical or your scholarly thing is often in your research. So your specialization is important. Certainly should have it on your CV, but how you play that and how you spin that in your cover letter will differ on the type of job you're looking for. How about one more, Lisa?
Okay. Is the job search process different for online teaching positions versus face-to-face teaching positions?
Another really good question. I think I think logic would say yes, very much so. And this is a world that's kind of interesting and changing. That the application process, what you've got to put up front, is going to be the same, whether you're pursuing a full-time teaching job here at Walden or wanting to work at Georgia Tech or somewhere like that. So the type of information, the criteria that you use to get it are very different. They are the same. The process you go through to interview might be somewhat different, and I think one of the things we've seen recently is increasing use by of land-based schools of technology. You might have some of your initial key interviews through Skype or some other online video sort of thing. For contingency positions, though, that's full-time. Full-time, they'll want to get you to campus in some way. They'll want to talk to you, take you to lunch, take you to dinner. You might be there for a couple days. Contingency jobs, though, a different kind of dynamic there. You are screened through their HR process often. You may never get much feedback until you are actually hired in some way, because they're looking for particular sets of abilities for you. They're going to assume They're not going to vet you in the same way that they would for a full-time position. But, you know, again, more similar than different. I think the differences are going to be kind of what they're looking for in your CV for an online job, and they're not going to, you know, nowadays you would never come to a campus, or you would never come to an office or something online to get that kind of job.
Great. Okay, Daniel, can I ask one more before we go on with our content? Because I think it's a pretty quick one. But two students have asked this as a similar question here. Is it better to wait for an opening or send letters of interest? And where does networking come into play?
You know, I would say the culture in higher education is, you know, the sort of write to a department and say, I'm interested in a job if one opens up. That doesn't work so well. You know, it may work in other disciplines and in other kinds of jobs, less so in this. I would say that, you know, you need to be wary and keep track of what's out there. You know, another thing to know is that increasingly, you know, back in the day when I was doing some of this stuff, it was a little more informal. And you know, you might talk to somebody in the department, you might you might see them at a professional conference, and there would be an informal part. That's changed a lot. I think the HR departments have very much control the process more. That you don't get to talk to anybody, and you shouldn't be talking to anybody until you are officially in the search process. So I don't know if that answers the question, Lisa. Did?
Yes, it did. Okay, so I think we can move on with our content. Thank you.
Okay, so what I've got here is a few slides that are just some general tips. No more organization to them than kind of things that bubbled up as I was putting this deck together here that I wanted to make sure I said. One of the most important things is to know what you really want. Teaching should not be a form of ego gratification. It's not about you. Although I think you will find some of the biggest egos you encounter in your life are full professors. But that's a process of becoming a full professor, not but I will just say that search committees are very sensitive to your motivation, and even though it's a lot about you, they are going to want to see that piece of you wanting to contribute, the generativity, if you will. So, big tip: start early. Establish yourself as a scholar while you're still a student. You know, a golden ticket for many new PhDs to go into teaching positions is whether or not they were able to publish and present while they were in their doctoral program. I actually worked on a project with a colleague when I was at Ohio State, and he and I got something published completely separate from our dissertation research while we were in the doctoral program. So as much as you can do that and find the time in your day to do that, that usually shows to a search committee you're committed to the plan here. Vitally important that you publish that dissertation. You know, we've got increasing amount of programming for out of the CRQ, and I know out of the Career Center for supporting our new scholars and stuff, and I don't want to get too in there, but find a way to do that. Find a way to get that out and show that you are committed to being a scholar. Keep professionally involved. Like I said before, many professional groups keep listservs just for faculty. I'm on a couple listservs now that are just faculty listservs, but they're open listservs. So if you can find your way onto it, then you get to see the conversation the faculty are having. You get to see often jobs being posted and those kinds of opportunities. You know, networking works. Even though I was kind of poo-pooing it a minute ago, it's still important. You know, your role as a college professor is a large package of you marketing yourself. I mean, it's about you on some level and making sure that you are somebody recognizable and you do something that is that you've got a name, if you will. So one of the ways you establish that is being around other scholars at professional conferences and that sort of stuff. You know, I like to say, and I put it in boldface here, you need to go to professional conferences and show your colleagues what they are missing if you are not a professor in their department. You know, maybe not at that time, but, you know, there is in my area, you know, when I was teaching, there was probably 100 people max in the whole nation that taught what I taught. So we all knew one another. So if somebody was coming through the pipe, or if I had a good, promising doctoral student, I would, when a position opened, I'd send that on. So that same sort of thing can happen by Or I said, boy, I saw this person at this particular conference and they were electric doing that presentation. You know, if they didn't apply, maybe you should reach out to them. So do those sort of things. May work, may not work, can't hurt. And it gives you another item on your CV, if you will. Next slide, please. Follow the money. You know, it's something that there's an interesting, we've talked a lot about this in my area about, you know, where and how do we teach students to write grants. And it's kind of supplemental to the education process, where it's more important for us that you get done. We don't want to put too many things on your plate. But I would encourage you, if you've not had a chance to, there's just so many different ways to learn about grants, participating on them. There's stuff on YouTube, there's books, there's websites, there's free stuff, there's pay stuff. As much as you can learn about how to secure funds in some sort of way, the better off you're going to be. More and more departments expect you to bring in external funding into the department. Some areas are better. You know, I'm in education, higher education. There ain't a lot of money out there for us in grants. Some areas, though, if you're in health services or public health, there's actually more opportunity for that sort of stuff for you. So as much as you can figure out ways to get that kind of experience. The problem with some grants, though, is you've got to establish, the next thing I'm talking about, your street cred as a scholar in order to qualify for one. So learn about them. I just think that as you fill out your CV and say other experiences down the bottom, that you've participated in 14 different trainings on grants, that's going to be viewed positively by a committee. Another thing, build your academic street cred. And by that I mean everybody's going online. It is, you know, it is been an interesting phenomenon. We've said for many years that higher education is ripe for some disruption, and we're in the middle of it now. So not only, you know, you all have an advantage that you completed a degree online. It wasn't too long ago that we kind of poo-pooed that, and now it's like a value added for many students. So that's good, and play that up. I think that's a good thing. You know, so you know, as much as you could find an opportunity to maybe teach a class online, that's a good thing. Even, you know, even becoming familiar with the technologies. You know, don't bat your eye when somebody says, well, we want a Skype interview. You should already have a Skype account set up and send them that address. And that should be on your CV, as a matter of fact. So as much as you can show that you're a good digital citizen these days, good thing. We talked a little bit about teaching, temporary teaching assignments. I won't say anything more about that other than try to take every opportunity that you're given. And even if it's for free, it's a good thing to do. Recognize, though, the reality of online contingent positions. And I know I've kind of gone back and forth between full-time and part-time jobs. There's a lot of similarities. There are some differences. As you look for these kind of jobs, especially online jobs, do your homework. You know, you all are Walden students. You know that we do a great job with that. We're in a category by ourselves as an online institution. There are some bad players out there, and you've got to make sure that you don't get yourself in that kind of realm. So be sure to do your homework. Check into them. If it's not an institution that you know, just be very wary. Know your excuse me. Know your niche. I would say that, you know, in many institutions like Walden, especially doctoral granting, that are contingent positions, the person who is kind of golden for us when they come through the search process is somebody who's a strong methodologist. It's not hard to find content people. It is hard to find people who know their chops and can know the difference between qualitative and quantitative such that they can advise a student to do that. So know your niche and go looking for that sort of thing. You know, I've been talking a lot about doctoral because I know you're familiar with it, but I would say that many doctoral level faculty positions are not something that a person goes into directly out of the doctoral program. They've had to maybe teach part-time, do some other things. At the undergraduate level, and at community colleges and smaller universities, you often go into those kind of positions right out of your PhD. So know what your niche is, kind of know what your message is, and sell that. The last thing on this slide here, and I just want to say a little bit about this, why not Walden? If there's one question, I think Lisa would agree, that we get asked more in this domain than anything is, how do I work for Walden? And on some level, that is just a great question to be asked. I mean, what a horrible problem to have, right? All our students want to come back and work for us. The problem with that, there's a couple problems here. Not problems, there's a couple of reactions I have to that. One, believe it or not, we are monitored by how many of our graduates we hire. Accreditors, both large and small, are not particularly fond of institutions that only hire their own. It's not, they don't view that as healthy, and I would agree with them. That if you want to be a strong institution, you need to be bringing people a diversity of opinion and a diversity of ways of doing things. So we have some actual caps and some limits on how many Walden faculty we can, how many Walden graduates we can hire. That aside, I would say the bigger thing, and I say this to students all the time, is you don't want to work here. We want you to go out and spread the wealth, spread your knowledge, take Walden other places. We want you to go out and bring all our best practices into these other institutions to improve them. I mean, we're all in this together in some cosmic way, and we want you to take those kinds of skills, market them to other institutions, and do that. Can you come back later? Sure. Is it a closed door to you? Not necessarily. But I would just say that probably the toughest institution for you to get a job in as a Walden graduate is Walden, for the reasons I just outlined. So have a realistic view of that. You all, I've met many of you in the almost 10 years now I've been at Walden. You just got some fantastic chops. I want you to take them out and spread that out in the rest of the higher ed world. I think I have one more slide here on tips. Yeah. Oh, important thing. Clean up your digital footprint. You know, it's different now than 22 years ago when I applied for that first job because of the internet. You know, search committees are not supposed to look at your Facebook account or your LinkedIn account or your Google Plus account, but they do anyway, and just know that. As much as you can, clean those things up. Delete those old accounts. There's actually been a couple of different things floating around out there for people. This again could be a whole workshop in and of itself. But just know, just Google yourself. That's probably the first thing you can do. And if you're, you know, if pictures of you and your family in Cabo San Lucas with you in a swimsuit on the beach pops up, you might want to think about that and what that means. It's just a hard reality of the world we live in that we can't, on the internet, separate our personal too much from our professional. So just be really wary of that. And the problem is that might happen. They might see you in a picture of you in New Orleans on Mardi Gras, and you would never know they saw it, but they may change their view of you. So think about that. Another thing to know that is kind of weirdly ironic here is that search committees are notoriously bad about giving applicants feedback in the faculty world. I don't know what it is. You know, I've certainly, I mean, we all have all of us who work in higher ed, we all have a stack of rejection letters from a lot of different places. That's just the way it works. But, you know, increasingly, the more I was in higher ed, the more I looked at other jobs and were part of search processes, the more I had to ask for a rejection letter to be sent to me. So just, you know, seek the feedback as much as you can, but have some realistic expectations here that committees are not always particularly good about it, giving it back. One kind of couple of final thoughts here, and then I got to be quiet. Thoughts on professional degrees. Given the fact that 135 of you are here right at this moment here, some of you are probably from our professional degree programs like the DBA and the EDD and those sorts of things. That's a growing trend in this market. And the difference between this kind of job and what I had applied for back in the day is that much more important in teaching in professional degree programs that you have the professional experience as well, because we do look for that blend of it. When you're going for a research position, often they want to know that you're a researcher, and you don't have to have a lot of professional experience. Not so much now with it, and I know you know this because if you're in these programs and the faculty you've worked with are many of our faculty in the DBA and the EDD and the DNP and all of these programs have tons and tons of experience. So just something to keep in mind. Last thing about some tips, and then I think I have one more slide after that maybe, is the hiring process can be very political and very competitive. I just think you need to have a thick skin and recognize that it's not about you. It's just, you know, it can be contentious out there, and you would think that college faculty would be good about these things, but sometimes it's not. So I just, you know, I just feel always obliged to remind people of that fact and don't let it become, you know, a big stopping point for them. Okay, one more slide for me. So the personal benefits of teaching. I want to end on a positive note because I've said some negative things here, some things that are kind of challenging. I have to go back and look at who this was, but you see this pop up quite a lot. Rated college professor is the #4 least stressful job in the nation. And I think that you know, and there was quite a lot of discussion on Twitter and the people that I follow about the reality of that. But I put it in here because I thought it was kind of funny what #3, #2, and #1 were, especially #2. So if you're too stressed out by being a college professor, maybe you need to go and become a hairstylist. But it is really, you know, in the scheme of jobs out there, it is really an easy job, and I think that's why. Maybe that's why I was one, but I just think that that's one of the benefits of it. We've talked a lot about the inherent reward of being a teacher. I can't stress that enough. One of the things, and I just want to tie it back to your own development as a person. I don't know if you're familiar with this notion of fluid and crystallized intelligence that's in psychology, but one of the challenges you have as you get older is to keep yourself challenged such that your ability to think creatively and problem solve stays sharp. And for people who don't have jobs that challenge them in this way, that type of intelligence seems to wane. Teachers, on the other hand, always a new challenge, especially at the doctoral level. Always something new and exciting, always something to think through. It's just an intellectually challenging thing, I think, that rewards you down the line. Finally, I think we're seeing more and more people who maybe have taught full-time who, as a retirement job, don't want to give that up. That's probably going to be my pathway here, you know. Downsize to part-time teaching. We've got a growing number of those people coming to Walden. I think you see a growing number of people out even in the community doing those sorts of jobs. So lots and lots of benefit there. And probably time for me to take a break here. Lisa, I think the next slide is for Nicole or for you.
Yes, it is. So I'm going to pass it to Nicole. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. So what we did here, we want to talk a little bit about career services, and we put together a word cloud which visually illustrates the top 10 job titles that Walden grads, and I want to emphasize that these are Walden doctoral grads who work in higher education and completed the graduation application survey. So the bigger the word on the visual, and you'll see here such as instructor, professor, assistant professor, director, etc. The bigger the word, the more times it showed up on the survey. So there were a total, I think, of 239. And again, I want to emphasize this visual represents just the higher ed industry. So 239 answered, and let's say like 46 instructors showed up 46 times. Professors showed up 46 times. So it's really, you know, a good representation of what our Walden grads are doing and the positions they're taking on in the field of higher education. So, however, there are many other career options that also we want to point out on the next visual that our doctoral grads pursue beyond academia. And, of course, we don't want you to count those out either. So here we have another visual representation of the top 10, again, job titles that showed up, not necessarily, this is outside of academia. So you'll see here manager, director, principal, counselor. So those of you who are interested also maybe in academia, but more in the student services side, you could think about something like what Lisa and I do, career services or academic advising. And we also take on educational type of roles like through our webinars, participating in residencies. So that's another angle that you can take, and also outside of academia. And we do want to mention that we will be doing, our plan is to do another webinar this year on alternative careers for doctoral students. So you might be interested in that as well. So again, as you can see from these two visuals, our graduates do work in a variety of fields, both inside and outside of higher ed. And as you prepare for your future career, consider reaching out to other students and graduates. Utilize your Walden network as well, and use social media and many of the things that Daniel mentioned on the webinar to learn more about these and other positions. And I'm also going to hand it back to Lisa, and she's going to share a story of another Walden graduate who actually used her networking and persistence to get her foot in the door in higher ed.
Thanks, Nicole. And, given the fact that, Daniel was talking earlier about the fact that higher ed teaching is a very competitive process. I mean, there are a lot of individuals with doctoral degrees who have a lot of teaching experience, have done research, and so it's a very competitive field. I would suggest, and I think Daniel would agree, and I'll check in with him on this, you really should have a good plan B in case that higher ed teaching option doesn't work out or it takes time for you to land a position. I would have a couple of options that I'm pursuing at the same time rather than just focusing on just the teaching option. So Daniel, would you agree with that statement? Are you
yes,
muted,
I would, and
Daniel?
I would recommend that.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's always good to have several balls in the air. So just, because we're getting a lot of questions, I don't have teaching experience, how can I compete for this? So just make sure, and you can work with a career services advisor to come up with strategies to pursue other options. But I just really want to encourage you to come up with several things that you're pursuing. But anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead and share the story of Dr. Teresa Rose. She also goes by Terry, and Terry is someone that I worked with and advising several years ago, and she actually was an administrative assistant with a bank and ended up getting her master's degree and then earned her doctoral degree with Walden. And now she actually is the director at a YMCA in Ohio. She really built her career path very solidly, and I asked her for some advice because in addition to being the director at the YMCA, she also has landed a part-time teaching position in her community. And so I asked, Terry, can you share some strategies with us for that? So she said that persistence and networking were key. She built a relationship with the Dean of Adult Education at the university she was targeting through sharing articles and thoughts about the adult education program. She applied for several positions, which again, I'm saying, have several balls in the air. She volunteered to help in community events at the university. She was positive about her passion as it interlocked with the vision of the university. And basically, she said, I kept at it until the door finally came open. So persistence and networking paid off. So I thank Terry for sharing her story with us because I think those are excellent tips. And so with that, I'm going to open it up for questions again. And I think Nicole has a good one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're getting tons of questions and two people, so we're going to try to get to as many as we can and, of course, address the ones with the widest applicability. So I do want to emphasize that. But two people mentioned that they've seen in the application process the statement of educational philosophy. So they're curious to know what exactly are institutions looking for in that educational philosophy and maybe what resources are out there to help them along with that.
That's a great question, and again, I think there are just so many layers of stuff here that we can't squeeze all into an hour, but some sort of statement is often asked for a couple reasons. One, they want to see how you write and how you put things together. So that's, in some ways, a small little writing sample. The other thing is that, I was saying before about ego and stuff, that even though this environment seems to have a lot of people with big egos, we're still looking for that core commitment to being a teacher, and that's one way that you can express that. So, it's a way for a committee to get a sense of you. How do you write it? You write it to be the way you are. What you don't want to do is try to write it like you think they want it. You want to write it to represent the person that you are, and market yourself in a positive kind of way that way. There's no template.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Several students have asked this question, so I definitely want to direct it to you. So regarding the difference between having a degree from an online university versus a brick and mortar university, how does one market themselves effectively having a degree from an online university such as Walden when there seems to be a presumption in favor of hiring folks from brick-and-mortar universities because generally they're more well-known and just, you know, people have more experience with graduates from those institutions?
Well, you know, that's a great question, Lisa, and I think you kind of answered it in asking the question. You know, I've been doing this for a while, and I would just say that the environment is improving. Is there somewhat of a bias against it? I still think there is a little bit, which means it means you have to double your effort to market yourself. You know, that, as I said before, we're in a changing, fluctuating environment. It's hard to say, you know, that I know our time is short. You know, I have a colleague who teaches at a research one in the South. I'll leave it at that. That has a bulldog as their mascot. So anyway, she has recently been asked to move their entire professional doctorate program online. And as they are starting to do a search now for a faculty position in that department, they are looking very carefully for somebody with that type of experience. So I would just say, you know, as you write your cover letter, I would just, I wouldn't apologize in any shape or form. I would just state that you went to Walden University and move on. And, you know, if they want to look it up, then they will. I think they will find, if they do bother to look it up, a very positive view of Walden in the community out there. So, you know, I would say the two tips is don't dwell on it, just move on and show them your stuff. Show them what you've done, the kinds of projects you've written, the papers you've done, your interest, what you know, all that sort of stuff that they're looking for.
Great, thanks, Daniel. And we're going to wrap it up with one last question, okay? And so Pearl asked, if my only teaching experience is creating curriculum and conducting training courses, will this be counted as teaching experience? In other words, is corporate training experience counted as teaching position, or, excuse me, teaching experience, or is teaching experience limited just to schools?
You know, that's great that this question's asked this way, because I think it does go back to something I kind of glossed over a little bit more in the CV. There's a difference between listing on your CV the teaching positions you've held and having a section on your CV that says teaching experience. And teaching experience, to my mind, is a broader category, because some of what, you know, if you've had to develop a curriculum, that's a good thing. I think most faculty don't know how to do that. You must be an education student. So, you know, that, you know, a category that's maybe couched as teaching experience as opposed to teaching positions that you've held is maybe the way to go. And then you can highlight those kinds of things. Corporate training, I think, and it depends on the discipline. I think that in management and stuff, that's going to be viewed as a form of teaching in that regard. In education, curriculum development is a part of that process. So I think that those are where those kinds of things can go as you organize your CV. Again, everybody's journey is different, so there's no one simple way to present that kind of information. But I think as far as teaching goes, hard experience to get sometimes. So all these little ancillary things that you do, pull them into a section so that the committee can see, look at all the things she's done that are different types of environments. She's worked with different kinds of populations. She's had to design all this stuff herself. Those things are good.
Terrific. Thank you, Daniel. You've just provided such a wealth of information today, and we just received so many really good questions, and so thank you for addressing those. And so now I'm going to hand it back to Nicole to wrap things up. And also, we ask that students complete our survey when you log off of the webinar. We really appreciate that, because we look at your suggestions for future ideas for future webinars. So please be sure to complete that. It only takes a few minutes. So Nicole, I'm going to hand it to you.
Okay, thank you. So we also want to emphasize, you know, definitely take advantage of the Walden Career Services in our website, and I really want to highlight our higher ed related webinars that we've really built up within the last year. You'll notice also Dr. Dan Salter did one for us on strategies for getting published in 2013. And we also worked with Dr. Kelly Jo Walters and Bill Schultz from the School of Management on 2 other phenomenal archive webinars. So please take advantage of those webinars. I know Dr. Salter mentioned, the CV. So it really builds also and brings us back to the Career Services resources, where we have a CV guide up on our resumes and CVs tab that you can see on the screenshot of our website there, and of course our archive webinars. Please take advantage of those resources as you build your reputation and your CV and move forward in your search. And to drill down further, we also have higher ed resources. He also mentioned higher ed jobs here today on the webinar as a website to go to for seeking out positions, and also the Chronicle of Higher Ed. And we have links under our resources tab. And you can find those by going to school or college and clicking on the education link there. So once again, really emphasizing our career resources. And then of course, these are different ways you can connect with Career Services. We do, again, emphasize LinkedIn, and Career Services has our own LinkedIn group that we encourage students to join and share resources and articles and comments, and that's another great way to share with your community. And follow us on Twitter, and we also have our Career Services blog where we write student success stories. Again, you can access everything on our Career Center website, and feel free to email us or schedule a one-on-one appointment. And we'd like to really end with an inspiring educational thought to end this webinar. In learning, you will teach, and in teaching, you will learn, from Phil Collins. So I think a lot of us can relate to that, and we really appreciate your participation today, and we appreciate Dr. Salter in making the extra effort to join and share all his expertise with us today. So have a wonderful afternoon, and again, thank you for your participation.